And so now I introduce myself. My name is Beth Anz. Hello, I'm your director here at UCB. Today we're going to talk about the March Sisters of Progress. Feminist future we can learn from Little Women. So welcome everyone. We'll start with this from Little Women. I'm angry nearly every day of my life. There are many quotes in Louisa May Alcott's book, Little Women, that hit differently in different phases of our lives. This dialogue from Marmee March, talking to her headstrong daughter, Jo, was published in 1868, but it feels just as relevant today. I'm angry nearly every day of my life. Now, this scene takes place after Jo, the second oldest of the four March sisters, had a fight with her younger sister, Amy. Amy was upset she was not invited out with the older sisters to the theater, so in anger, she burns her writer sister's, Jo's, most prized possession, which is her manuscript. Jo vows never to forgive Amy and takes off the next day with their neighbor friend Lori, ice skating on the local pond. Amy follows after, trying to catch up with them on her skates, and while Jo ignores her, Amy falls into the freezing waters of the pond, and Jo rushes to save her sister's life. She then regrets her anger at her sister. It is at this moment that we find Jo with her mother Marmee, asking her for advice. Jo says, if she had died, it would have been my fault. Marmee says she will be fine. The doctors say it didn't even think she'd catch cold. Jo, what's wrong with me? I've made so many resolutions and written sad notes and cried over my sins, but it just doesn't seem to help. When I get in a passion, I get so savage, I could hurt anyone and I'd enjoy it. Marmee says, you remind me of myself. But you're never angry, says Jo. Marmee says, I'm angry nearly every day of my life. Jo says, you are? Marmee says, I'm not patient by nature, but with nearly 40 years of effort, I'm learning to not let it get the better of me. As I grow older, I understand more the feelings of Marmee and her daughters, and it's no wonder they are angry. The four March sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, all have different dreams and desires, but these dreams are limited by their Civil War era society where women were not to seek the desires outside of marriage, family, and a domestic life. Now let's recognize they did have some privilege. They were white women of modest means in an affluent society, but they had their challenges and their societal expectations like any other woman of the era. It is as their Aunt March reminds them, it is their duty to make a rich match and marry well. The youngest, Amy, who travels with Aunt March, echoes her aunt's lessons when she approached by a suitor. Amy says, as a woman, there's no way for me to make my own money, not enough to earn a living or support my family. And if I had my own money, which I don't, that money would belong to my husband the moment we got married. And if we had children, they would be his, not mine. They would be his property. So don't tell me that marriage isn't an economic proposition, because it is. It may not be for you, but it most certainly is for me. We can hear echoes of this speech in our world today. Director Greta Gerwig, who directed the 2019 movie adaptation of Little Women, found this dialogue speaks to a modern world just as if it has for generations of women and girls. And as for recent movie Barbie, which we saw earlier, she gave her heroine a speech that would have resonated with the March sisters. Her mom, Gloria, in Barbie, talks to the dolls about the expectations of women in society and their contradiction. In part, it reads, you're supposed to say pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much or that you threaten other women, because you're supposed to be part of the sisterhood. But always stand out and always be grateful. But never forget the system is rigged. So find a way to acknowledge that, but always be grateful. You have to never get old, never get rude, never show off, never be selfish, never fall down, never fail, never show fear, never get out of line. It's too hard, too contradictory, and nobody gives you a medal or says thank you. And it turns out, in fact, that not only are you doing everything wrong, but also everything is your fault. Now, these two speeches, Amy and Gloria, are 150 years apart. But we see everything old is evergreen in this society. Generations of women have understood that male white society held the power and the privilege, and marriage was the only way forward. It was only 50 years ago, that women gained the right to open their own bank accounts and credit cards without the co-signature of a man. Marriage is a financial institution, Amy March says, and women have to fight for their own agency and the right to their own independence and autonomy. Now, I can remember my own grandmother reminding me to bring home a rich man when I went off to college. This was at the turn of this century. As I'm sure was a disappointment to her, I married for love, not status. But generations before me stood up for that equality to allow me that privilege. Yes, Marmee, we are still angry, and we are tired. And I'd like to think much of this has changed, but we see how quickly long fought for rights can be rolled back, right? Unitarians and Universalists have fought for generations. They have stood up for equality, and while not always on the right side of history, we've always stood up for what we thought was right. We have been in this movement for abolition, for women's rights, for civil rights, and body autonomy for years, and yet we still must persist. Yes, Marmee, we are still angry, and we are tired. Now, author Louisa May Alcott based this book much on her own life growing up. These little women she wrote about, they were not helpless. Each had their own dreams, their own identities, and while they faced many obstacles, they were all able to make their own mark. Much like the March family, she grew up with idealist Unitarian parents who were active in progressive causes and aided the Underground Railroad. They rubbed elbows with famous transcendentalists like Emerson and Thoreau, but Louisa never married. She worked towards causes such as abolition, feminism, temperance, and women's suffrage throughout her life. And like her protagonist, Jo, she worked to earn her own money and independence. Starting at a young age, she wrote sensationalized stories under various pen names. But it wasn't until she started writing her own experiences with her sisters that she found success with Little Women. Now, there is much we can learn from these women. Generations of women in particular have been inspired by how these women forged their own paths in a society that wished to define them. This is a feminist story. But even beyond that, it's a story of agency, of finding ourselves in a society that wishes to define us. A story that is evergreen for every generation who seeks to define themselves outside society's expectations. Women, men, non-binary, and transgender people can find themselves in these stories because it is a story about our authentic selves. Take, for example, the 4 March sisters. The 4 girls, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, are joined by their neighbor boy, Laurie, in their adventures, putting on plays and playing games together. All of them are searching for ways to follow their dreams and escape the expectations of society. It's a timeless coming-of-age story, a time we can all relate to which we seek to find ourselves. Now, Jo, the strong, independent-minded sister, is the picture of feminism. She's fearless, she's bold, she's assertive and opinionated, everything that society tells women not to be. She encourages her sisters to find their own path and to follow their dreams, to reject marriage and home life, and to live independently. As she tells her Aunt Marmee, I intend to make my own way in the world. Now, this is a bold assertion for a woman in society. She perceives the privilege, the opportunities men are afforded in her society. In fact, she tells her male friend Laurie, I can't get over my disappointment at not being a boy. Because she envies his freedom as a man. He is the freedom to choose his path and to make his way in this world. But Laurie sees it differently. He believes that it is the March sisters who have the true freedom to dream and play, while he's expected to study and follow in his grandfather's business. And he cannot choose his future. Both of them feel trapped in what society expects and long to be able to define who they are for themselves, something we could all relate to. While Jo is one example of a feminist, she's not the only one. A feminist can be bold and independent of men and of marriage and societal expectations, but true feminism is agency. It is the ability to choose our own path and not have it defined for us, even by well-meaning others. In the novel, Jo accuses her older sister Meg of throwing away her dreams by getting married. Now, it would be easy for us to take Jo's view and see traditional marriage as an act of regression, but Meg marries for love, for her own reasons, and calmly reassures her sister in a famous line, Just because my dreams are different from yours, it doesn't mean they're unimportant. And that's an important lesson. Your dreams are different than mine. That does not make them less or more. They're just different. And they're important to you. And that's what matters. True feminism does not define who we can or we can't be. It is allowing all of us to define who we are and what we dream for ourselves. In college, I had the privilege of attending Friday prayers at a mosque. I admit I had preconceived notions of the oppression of women when I arrived. Like Joe, I thought I knew what it meant to be free, to dress as I wished, and to not be bound by any rules of society. But I learned my ignorance quickly. They explained to us that they found freedom in their dress because they controlled who they revealed themselves to and how much they covered themselves. It was both a religious and a personal choice. Where I saw restriction, they saw freedom and agency over their bodies. Where I saw oppression, they saw protection and choice. And like Meg, their choices were different than mine, but they were still important to them. And while Joe's feminism rejected the societal norms, the youngest sister, Amy, seeks to redefine her role within society's constraints. Now, Amy dreams of painting and living the life of an artist, but she's a realist. She understands that to live the life she wants, she needs to take her Aunt March's advice and marry well, which she does, but I'll give you no more spoilers here. She should not be vilified for her choices. We must all work with what we're given, and we need to find happiness where we can. And Amy knows what she wants and how to use her role in society to get it. That, to me, is a bold, modern woman. And finally, the fourth sister, Beth, who I am sad to learn I am not named after, is quiet and often portrayed as a perfect, saintly young woman. Another trope of womanhood, saintly or scandalous, an angel or a devil. But we should look deeper at Beth. She is another example of feminism, of service, of charity, and community. While a character like Joe is the bold, louder, more prominent face of feminism, Beth is the quiet caregiver. Her mother, Marmee, encouraged the girls to look after their neighbors in times of need, especially the poor Hummel family who lived nearby. In a particularly meaningful scene, the girls, at the urging of their mother, take their Christmas breakfast to the Hummels so they have something to eat. Director Greta Gerwig, who is also a Unitarian Universalist, directed the 2019 movie, and it beautifully frames the March sisters in this scene, passing by a church, flurry with activity to go to the Hummels. It tells the true act of Christian charity is not in the building, but in our actions. True to Unitarian Universalism, it's action over platitudes. Beth takes that lesson of Christian charity to heart and continues to look after the Hummels even when they are sick, sacrificing her own health and comfort for the sake of others. We see many examples of Beth in our world. Those who work tirelessly behind the scenes, the nurses during COVID, the servers and the cooks in disaster areas, the lawyers defending those who define and defend freedom. All of those jobs, the work behind the scenes so others could do the work of justice. This is community, and it takes a community. In the book, Joe is inspired by Beth to write from the heart and create Little Women. Without Beth, there is no Joe. And therefore, without support from each other, there is no movement. That is feminism for all of us. Supporting one another to be ourselves and to create a society in which we can all thrive. And as we march towards this progress, we realize we need each other. We need to understand that feminism is not a singular ideal, it is a community. Our agency looks different to each other. And that's not just okay, it's necessary to truly be a feminist. Yes, women, men, he, she, they, all of us can be feminists. And we must understand that supporting one another, hearing each other's stories and dreams, and creating spaces to be ourselves, this is the true freedom. Each of the March sisters found their own path and their own agency, and together, so may we. So don't give up the fight, dear friends. March on. Listen to one another, truly listen, and expand the circle to include everyone. It is our passion, our anger. This can be our gift, our catalyst to build the world we seek. Yes, Marmee, a world that creates agency for all of us, collectively. So may it be. Thank you all.